The reality check after a decent start to the season was always going to come to an end sooner rather than later. I'm just not sure we thought it would be at Sunderland. I mean, going a goal down after 54 seconds pretty much set the tone for the afternoon. We're back in the more familiar territory of chewing over a heavy away defeat. It's like, welcome back. Here we go. Alfie, I mean, a long trip for you, and I know you were up there early as well because of deadline day. But I mean, at one point, Sunderland had 4 shots on target, and I think they've scored 5 goals. Where do we start summing up that game?
Well, I think you start in the first 90 seconds, don't you? You start with what Russell Martin pointed out at the end of the game is that Southampton got a quick corner, real chance to put some pressure on in the first 90 seconds of the game, took it short, lost the ball, and then all of a sudden there's nobody in any space at all. I think Stuart Armstrong's probably the only person within about 25 yards of that right-hand side of the pitch, and he's able to just whip a ball in back post, and that's one goal in 90 seconds. And then to give it away for a second, a little bit unlucky, to be fair, with the Flynn Downs deflection, which people who have criticised Gavin Bazunu for, but it did take it closer to Gavin, but I don't think it was savable, I have to be honest. And then the third right before half time, that one probably was savable. And if you go 3 goals down at half time, you've got no hope. Russell did respond with a couple of changes, but left a couple of those sort of struggling right at the back line on. And I don't want to dig out individual players, but Mason Holgate is not going to be particularly happy with that performance, obviously, to give the ball away right in half time. And I say Russell was one of the changes, but then it wasn't until 10, 20 minutes later that they actually made a few more. I just think they just never got a grip with it. Sunderland had more energy than them. They were just, we spoke about the fullbacks actually last week, didn't we, to be fair, Steve? Just getting in behind the fullbacks, left, right and centre. And it was the same again. I thought Ryan struggled a little bit. And Swansea last season, George will be able to tell you more, but I think they scored more goals than most teams in the division, but only the 2-3 relegated teams and QPR actually conceded more than Swansea. So I think we're going to have to get used to a lot of goals going in at both ends. You just like to spread that 5 out a little bit more than they were on Saturday.
I mean, George, you missed these kind of results last season for us. For us, it's familiar territory chewing over these sort of results. But that really was a bit out of the blue yesterday, wasn't it? What did you make of it all?
Yeah, I think you could almost maybe feel like a not so great result was coming because Russell Martin spoke quite a lot about how he was happy to get the wins against Plymouth and QPR, but ultimately he wasn't really happy with the performance. And if a manager's saying that, someone who clearly knows much more about football than we do, then there's probably some stuff that even as fans we maybe aren't picking up on as much. But I didn't think it was going to be a 5-0 loss. Like Alfie said there, you start the game that poorly, it's always going to go downhill, especially against someone like Sunderland. I spoke to Flynn Downs before the game and asked him about that sort of atmosphere, going to a stadium where they're going to pack it out with 40,000 fans. Does he enjoy those sorts of games? And he said, actually, yeah, I really enjoy it, especially with the way we play. We're going to be able to go and dominate the ball, but they didn't even really get a chance to do that before they were 2 goals down. And that just makes it so much harder to be able to dominate the ball, because you can't just dominate the ball and hope and wait to create a chance. You've almost got to go and score immediately. And in doing that, you kind of create more gaps at the back. And we almost saw them, Gavin Bazunu had to pull off a couple of saves to prevent it getting to 3-0, even before he did unfortunately sort of let one in at his near post. So the game plan kind of went out of the window within about 10 minutes of the game. Even though they still sort of played the way that Russell Martin likes to play, they kind of had to have that a little bit more initiative, and they had to kind of maybe take a few more risks, because ultimately in the Championship, you've got to get straight back into games if you go behind.
I mean, Steve, we were warned about the mistakes, weren't we, coming from knocking the ball about at the back? But I mean, yesterday was another one of those games where people told us that this would happen.
To an extent, but actually it was only the 3rd goal that really came from us giving the ball away in a even semi-dangerous position. There was still a lot of work to do for them to score that 3rd goal, even at the point where Holgate gives it away. The problem is that Holgate's made the mistake, and he's compounded it by then charging out of position to try and win it back immediately. And they've knocked the ball around him, and all of a sudden there's 15 yards of space to run into. And that comes from composure, and just got completely flapped by it all. That's frustrating. And I mean, let's be honest, I'd be surprised if come the Leicester game if Harwood Bellis isn't in there alongside Bednarek instead. That's kind of how chastening that sort of first hour for Holgate was, and obviously compound it then with their 4th goal shortly after half time, where he's got himself in the right position, to be fair to him, to clear the cross, and somehow has just completely swung at fresh air, and the guy's got a tap in. And yeah, it's just frustrating that so many goals come from crosses, and I mean, I'm sick and tired of discussing it. That the number of crosses that we allow to come into the box completely unchallenged.
Mhm.
Like there's no attempt to get out for the fullbacks to get out to the wingers, to put any pressure on to block the crosses. There's no pressure from the midfielders in front of them, or inside from the central midfielders to lend any support to try and aid in blocking those crosses. And so teams know that they can just keep whipping crosses in till the cows come home, and eventually, balance of probability, they'll put a good one in. Players at this level are still good players, and they will get on the end of good balls. And yeah, we've got to sharpen up quickly.
It also seems like Kyle Walker-Peters and Ryan Manning. I mean, we know Kyle's not, but Ryan as well. They're not really the best. You would not sort of the fullback you'd want, I suppose, if a ball's being swung into the back post. They're going to lose that battle a few times out of 10 at least.
I did think it was nice, Alfie, when the manager came out and kind of took responsibility for that team selection at the back and said, actually, do you know what? I put him in. I put Holgate in. I knew that he hadn't played much football. I knew he was going to be a bit rusty. I just had a hunch, and he kind of carried the can a bit for that afterwards.
Yeah, I suppose because it would have been probably the slightly less brave thing to just put Shea Charles in, who was good there against QPR. He's fully up to speed now, and aerially as well. I mean, Shea Charles in the air, he's the only person, well, not the only person, but he's one of the few that really attacks the ball, whether it's in his own box or in the opposition box. So credit to him. But yeah, Russell
should have scored from
those
corners in the second half as well.
Should have scored, but nobody else gets to him, and he's definitely a weapon there. But yeah, Russell, he's authentic, isn't he? He's honest, and he does protect his players as well. He protects his players just like Ruben Sellers did. So he doesn't want them to be lambasted. And I think Steve sort of alluded to there was a bit of a reaction online, and people have every right to be fuming, especially if you've travelled 10 at 12 hours, you spent hundreds of pounds on there. So it's not the performance that you should have had. But I'm not in the position where I'm really, really panicking about the rest of the season now. I believe in the team that's there. I think they've got a good squad. I think that was just a wake-up call that was needed.
Well, I'm going to ask you all for your player of the week in just a minute, which I think is going to be a nigh on impossible task. Steve, I mean, we could go through all the goals, but we'd be here all night. So just a quick word on the officials, because I didn't think they were great yesterday. God. That was another eye-opener for us. And obviously, we've been saying how great it is this year not having VAR. And then you get that foul on Manning in the box, and that would probably have been given. So it was a tough afternoon for the officials too.
Yeah, I mean, we got David Coote parachuted down from the Premier League to take charge of this game. So I assume he must have had a shocker in a Premier League game last week to get demoted like that. But yeah, he was garbage, wasn't he? Just basic decisions not being given right. And yeah, and the thing with that penalty decision is he's literally looking right at it. He could not have a better view of it. And yet he's decided, no, nothing doing there. The guy's clearly kicked Manning in the calf, causing him to go down. Ball runs through and they clear it, and it's just ridiculous. I mean, let's also be fair. The officials aren't the reason we lost that game.
No.
But
we do like a moan about them, right?
but then at 2-0 down, if you score that penalty 2-1, it's a different game. The momentum swings our way, and maybe we get a grip of things and take the game by the scruff of the neck and turn it around. You don't know how these things are going to pan out, and all you ask is for basic decisions. It shouldn't be difficult, and yet somehow so many of these supposedly professional referees now make it incredibly difficult for themselves.
George, are there any positives that we take from that game? Maybe the international break that's coming up. I did read yesterday that I think we're still technically in a better position than Burnley were this time last year. I'm properly clutching at straws, but was there anything decent to come out of that game?
I think the thing you mentioned there about Burnley is maybe something to hold on to as a bit of positivity. Russell Martin said it in his Sky interview after the game that he hopes that the loss will give them the humility to improve. So I guess if you're looking at it that way, that kind of if a big loss hits you this early in the season, when you are a team who are going to push for promotion, that you'd hope that would kind of give some of the players a wake-up call, especially maybe some of the ones who've come down from the Premier League who maybe don't quite know the Championship. They're all professionals. They know the Championship's going to be quite a tough league, but maybe that's going to give them the sort of wake-up call. And the international break's probably the best time to have a big loss, because although you'll have a lot of the players going away to either the senior national teams or some of the youth national teams, there's going to be a chance now for some of the players like a Mason Holgate, he's not going to go away on international duty. He's just had a really poor debut. He's not really learnt the detail of the system so far, so he's going to be able to get that closer contact with Russell Martin and the coaches, and you'd hope that that's going to be able to get him up to speed maybe a bit quicker than he would have been able to if there was now another run of 3 or 4 games in consecutive weeks. So I think there are some things that you can look at as positives, but ultimately it is pretty much a negative result, isn't it?
Just draw a line under it. Yeah. I'm going to try and get a player of the week out of you if possible. I mean, I heard somewhere, I'm sure he said that Mara looked great in training. So I'm kind of tempted to say I'll nominate him because it sounds like he did all right in training. I don't know if you can go really much off of what anybody did on Saturday. Alfie, was there anyone that stood out for you? Maybe anybody on the bench that didn't get on?
Yeah, I mean, they would be the ones.
Risen.
I think, well, Taylor, Steve mentioned before going on air, Taylor Harwood-Bellis is probably the player of the match because he's guaranteed himself a starting spot in 2 weeks' time and nobody else has. I think I'd have to say that maybe Shea Charles and Stuart Armstrong are probably Shea off the bench, and I felt that Stu actually was quite good on the ball, and there was a couple of times he sort of broke the lines and drove in beyond. So maybe them two.
Steve, anyone for you stand out? I mean, subs coming on.
It's hard though, isn't it? It's not
It's
easy.
tough. Yeah, we did when we started the season and we thought this was a good idea. We never thought we'd be picking over a 5-0 defeat.
Yeah, I mean, as much as Bazunu was probably at fault for the third goal, he also kept kept score down in the second half with two excellent saves. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't stretch to put him in any player of the week vote. That's for sure. God knows. No, coming up blank, to be honest. Yeah.
George, help us out.
I'm going to have to steal one of Alfie's answers. I'm going to have to go for Shea Charles. I don't think he was incredible coming off the bench, but he did give Saints fans that very momentary brief moment of happiness when he kind of went up, won the header, and then it ultimately went wide. So I think in a 5-0 loss, those 2 seconds of excitement are kind of the furthest you can stretch to for a moment of the game.
Yeah, welcome to the podcast, George. Right, well, let's draw a line under that one and we'll move on.